asked me to revise it. So because I'm a visual learner, I put lots of pictures in, which I think helps. I hope it helps. But I really encourage you to give me feedback. So if you're getting questions on a topic that I haven't put in here, please let me know, because it's easy to add. So I just sort of did the, as you noticed, I just sort of did covered the basic things. So introduction to the archive. So if somebody comes in, they want more information, you have a little bit about the archives and my contact information at the bottom. And it also talks about why we're in the museum, why are we here? And who are the Sisters of St. Anne? I mean, this is, for me, this is, it's a non-question, but people don't know who the Sisters of St. Anne are. Like, why did they, I will get to that in a minute, but who are they? Why were they founded? What was their mission? What is a sister? The younger generations have no idea what I mean, people know the term nun, and then I did explain the difference between nun and sisters. I don't know at the bottom here, but I mean, if you, people say, where do you work? I say I'm an archivist for the Sisters of St. Anne, and then it's hard to say they're sisters. So I will often say nuns, and they're like, oh, they understand that term, but it's not the term that we use for them if we're talking to them. I did a little bit on the Anne versus Anne, so this is confusing to a lot of people, but basically Anne without an E is the English spelling, Anne with an E is the French spelling. So I covered that. Why did they come to Victoria? This is a basic question. They had an interesting journey coming here. Of course, there was no Panama Canal, so it was a 4-month trek around North America. But on the way they learned the Chinook language. So would you like to join?
Sure. Sorry.
They took the time to learn the Chinook language. Somebody had, I think Demers had brought a Chinook jargon dictionary with him when he went, and so they had a few communication skills with the Métis children and the First Nations children, because Chinook jargon was the language of commerce in Victoria at the time they arrived. So the next part I did was who were the first sisters and their companions. So this is sort of meant to augment what's on the walls. So there's information on the walls, but this is sort of to help you a little bit more than that. I hope I've done a good job here. I highlighted a little bit Sister Mary Providence because she was so important and so loved by the sisters. So I did do a little bit of extra on her. But if there's other sisters that people ask about, I can certainly do biographies on them. The first residents of the cabin gets a little bit forgotten because of the focus on the sisters. But they were so linked to the sisters through their daughter Emily. And so there's one of the little write-ups in the desk is on Emily Morel, and gives her story in French and English. But I think it's an important part of the story. So how did the actual cabin get to be built? I really like this photo because it shows how few buildings there were in Victoria at the time the sisters arrived. Apparently, there was a tent city from the gold miners, but
Yes, right.
I've never seen a photo or an artistic rendering of this gigantic tent city. So I'm a little skeptical.
It was many thousands, wasn't it?
Apparently so, yes. Anyway, in my many years of being an archivist in this town, I have never seen any really concrete evidence other than anecdotal writings by Higgins or people like that. So I don't know where this tent city was. has any other information, I'd love to hear it. The photo at the bottom shows the original location of the cabin in relationship to the first wing of the academy building.
Where's Kansas?
See where the little arrow goes through?
Oh, here,
So
oh,
there
I
it is.
thought that arrow was to
Yeah, no,
the
it's
sisters.
peeking, peeking out from behind there, yeah.
Right,
That
thank you.
picture's on the wall, as you know.
Yeah, so the picture's on the wall, so when you're familiar with the photo, you can take people over to it and show them.
Oh.
The addition, now I mentioned this last time, so apparently the addition fell down after being there for 30 years. We haven't been able to find any evidence of this, but it's not there, so it obviously did go. But if anybody's willing to troll those newspapers, that would be marvelous. The first students, so who were these first students that showed up at the sisters' house? And also, it's important to debunk the myth that, the sisters arrived and the students knocked on the door and, it was the Sunday they arrived and Monday they started class. It's not how it happened. So I did cover that in this. It wasn't until they built the addition, which opened in November, that they really started class. So before that was catechism. And they would have, Sister Mary Angel would have taught catechism by pictures. So she probably used the Catholic ladder. Does anyone know what the Catholic ladder is? No? So the Catholic ladder is catechism in pictures. The original one is about 6 feet long. It was developed by, what's his name? One of the very early Catholic priests out on the West Coast here. His name escapes me at the moment. Anyway, his first way to teach catechism was he had a stick and he notched holes in it, and different symbols in it, and this is how he taught catechism because there was a language barrier. And then this developed into this picture thing, and I have one in the archives if anyone's interested in seeing it. And so it would have been taught through Vinton.
What exactly is catechism anyway? I've heard the word.
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I have a glossary of terms in the back of the book. In the back of the handout. So it's really the way they teach Christianity to non-Christians. Who is God? That kind of question. So catechism is usually taught to little kids in Sunday school, but can be taught to adults to convert to Catholicism as well. I don't know in the Anglican Church if there must be a similar, just has a different name probably. But yes, so if a kid is in Sunday school, they're learning catechism.
Is it still used today?
Absolutely, yeah.
But in a different way, is it? Or
Which, the picture?
The catechism.
Catechism, yes, the catechism is actually absolutely
Part of the
used.
service or something, is it?
It's like anything you wanted to know about the Catholic Church and we're afraid to ask.
Oh,
That's
okay.
basically it. Who are the saints? What are saints? What are angels? Who are the cherubims? What is heaven? What is prayer? What is the road? All those kind of questions that you would need to know if you were to be a Catholic. So that's catechism. So their goal, obviously, when they arrived, was to convert people to Catholicism and give them a Catholic education. But it didn't quite work out that way. And actually I think I mentioned it in here, the parents, because they weren't just Catholic, there weren't a lot of Catholics here. Everybody was here. So every religion was here. So the parents didn't like all the Catholic symbols and such, but they wanted their children to get a good education. So the sisters ended up not having crucifix in the classroom and not having prayers, and so one of the sisters writes that it really bothered them. They wanted to have that religious education, but there was pressure from parents. So that's kind of an interesting.
I never school we had prayers in any school.
Yeah, when it was more accepted. This is early days, right? Early days. A bit of an unruly town. You know, it's really a melting pot of traditions and cultures and language. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't established like Eastern Canada. It wasn't an established town. It was like, kind of, you know, not cowboys, but you know, it was rough. It was a rough town. It was, yeah.
Gold miners and fur traders.
Pretty much.
Saloons.
Yeah, saloons, many saloons to service those, and the businesses were starting, and then there's these, you know, 4 women in habit here to teach and eventually to nurse. So they were a little bit of a,
Did you read this?
they were a little bit different, you know.
Did they
She was
teach you French
proposed to
at
about 3
first?
times a day.
Or how was the language skills?
There was one,
Try to
Sister,
remember short
Sister Mary, her name, I don't know why her name escapes me at the moment. One of the sisters spoke English, and the rest spoke only French.
No, earlier on page 9, it says that Sister Marie de la Concepcion,
Sion, yeah, Sister
was
Mary of
the
the
English
Conception,
teacher.
thank you, Sister Mary of the Conception de la Concepcion, yes, she taught in English. It would have been a lot, these kids, the first kids had no education. So we're starting with the very basic beginnings of educating somebody. So and they would have had some books and other things, but I don't know this for sure, but it would have been a lot just by talking, and I think by pictures, by explaining things, because how do you start teaching somebody who has no knowledge of what is education? I shouldn't say education, I should say Western education model. I mean, how do you start? I think it's
Immersion program when they started kindergarten, it's the same probably way.
probably similar. You know, it's I think it was a lot of talking. I think it was a lot of explaining and doing rather than sort of yes.
Did they use their Chinook?
They would have had. They likely.
So
would
it might
have.
have been a medley of instruction in French and Chinook and English.
It was probably a mixture, but Chinook was developed as a training language, so there might not have been a word for, you know, something that they need. So they would have they just made it work. They were innovators and they made it work.
And on the map here, I noticed that they have the Panama Canal, but the Panama Canal wasn't
It
built.
wasn't open, no, but that's where it is. Which page are you on, Ben?
It's page 8.
8, thank you.
It doesn't look
Yes.
very long.
So this was drawn by a sister. Yeah, so they went across the Panama Canal there on a little train that ran across the isthmus. Across the isthmus there.
Yeah, that would be better to have that when you come on canal, really.
Well, yeah, I guess. Yeah,
Seeing as it runs the railway, it's.
Yeah, sister did this, I just threw that in because
Sure.
I liked it. It sort of shows you the extent, and this little drawing at the bottom, apparently it was, at one point they had to cross some water, and there was no boat, so the men carried the sisters. This would have been way beyond anything they should have done, you know, so, and there's a couple of accounts of them being carried through the water so that they didn't get their habits wet. The wool, the 5 layers of the wool habit, and we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, Betty, lost my train of thought. That's okay, I don't mind. Okay, where was I? Oh yes, education. Yeah, so nobody actually wrote about the day-to-day teaching. So I don't have a really clear picture of it, so that part of it is just guessing. So we did residents like the Morel family.
The things that you know about, you know, the teaching or what it was like, were they reports that were sent back to Montreal, or were they just, you know, things that records that?
Well, I've read
They
the
have.
reports that were the very early day reports sent back to Montreal, but it wasn't that specific. It was more about, because the way they wrote those reports are called chronicles,
Oh, yes.
and the way they wrote them was had to be a very specific way they wrote them. So things would be mentioned, like we had so many students. It was very sort of factual and,
Administrative.
exactly,
Yes.
so,
Carrie,
yes.
was there any, was the founding of the school strictly a Roman Catholic initiative? Or was there any help by the Hudson's Bay Company?
No,
'Cause I'm thinking of the-
it was Bishop Demers
Yeah.
who said, we need a school. He says, I need a school in Victoria. This town is out of control. We need a school to educate the children that are here. So he goes off to he goes off on he's hunting for a congregation that is ready to come to a place that's not even part of Canada yet. This is the back and beyond. This is another world out here. They have no idea.
These people are missionaries.
These people are missionaries. They are they are missionaries, and they are brave. They are women, and they're brave. And so he goes off to Montreal, and he chats to a few of the congregations, and there's 400 of them in Montreal at this point. And 400 congregations of women religious.
Wow.
And he chats to a few, and somebody says, you should go talk to the Sisters of Sin, and they're really new congregation. So they were only 8 years old. They hadn't really, missionary work was not part of the original plan, but they stepped up to the plate. Yeah, let's go. They all put up their hand, all 45 of them. Put up their hand, we'll go. So something happened there where they decided they would become missionaries and go into the unknown. Yeah.
And then it was, education was so gendered that you would go to, for a group of women, you would have to have a congregation of women or a sect.
Well, that's really interesting question, because the congregation was founded on the premise that they would teach both boys and girls, which was unheard of. So when Blessed Mother Marianne went to Bishop Bourget and said, I want to found this congregation to teach both girls and boys, it was unheard of, and he agreed to it. So, but when the very first students were all girls. And then they did but in about a year they were teaching little boys as well. They never taught teenage boys, except once in New Westminster when the St. Louis College in New Westminster closed. But that wasn't their thing to teach teenage boys.
How long were the boys taught at the fort and the girls taught? Or was there that original divide?
The boys were taught, the Catholic boys, I believe, were taught by whatever priests were about. So Mandart was here early. I don't know if Demers, he was the bishop, I don't know if he did any teaching and so they would have been taught by them. But any boys that were of age 10 or so were always, if they were from English families, they were always sent back to England to be educated.
Now, I don't know where I got it. Did anybody else pick up that boys were educated at the fort?
That was my understanding, and of course, there was also Protestant ministers.
So
Was it Staines?
Reverend Staines had a school, and Mrs. Staines, so they were Anglican, and Mrs. Staines taught the girls, so that's a different, yeah. And there were some other little private schools, like Mallandane, the architect, had a school. Mrs. Pettibow had a school. There were some little tiny private schools that had popped up. It was after 1858, but 1859, 1860. So they were popping up. And then Angela College, of course, was another Anglican school for girls.
But that didn't precede St. Anne's.
No.
St. Anne's is first formal.
Well, the Staines, I guess Staines is
Staines would be the
first formal Anglican school. But public school, the first public school in Victoria was
Craigflower, maybe?
Craigflower, maybe, yeah. Because the school reserve where Central School is now, that was the school reserve that the Hudson Bay Company set out to have a public school there. And it was way out of town though, in 1858, that was bear country.
But interesting then to have the first public school in bear country, even,
Yes,
like
it
the
was,
Craig Flowers were a very that was a very powerful, influential family with lots of kids, or lots of,
yeah,
The Mackenzies,
But-
they were.
but it makes Mackenzie's.
yeah, Mackenzie's, yeah.
But it sounds interesting that the first formal public school would be in the boonies.
Yeah, Shirley Cuthbertson, who was an archivist at BC Archives, wrote a history of the public schools in Victoria.
Oh.
So you might wanna look it up. And also how to find records at the BC Archives about the first public schools. It's not my area of expertise, I just sort of know about these other little schools in the
You said Shirley
Cuthbertson, yeah. And she must have written that in the 1980s.
Okay.
But when we talk about St. Anne's Schoolhouse as being the oldest existing schoolhouse,
It would be correct.
that would be
statement.
correct. So for visitor experience designers, when you're letting visitors know, really play up the historical significance of that.
So
Is that fair to say?
Is Craig Flower not considered older than,
I don't know what Crayflower,
or was Craig Flower even considered a part of Victoria at the time?
yeah, I mean, if you could say it's outside,
Yeah,
it is outside of the boundaries of Victoria, it's in
It was
New
one of
Royal.
But we have
And
said
it
the
did-
oldest schoolhouse in BC, so it's not in Victoria.
BC. Oh, in BC.
That's what I've heard.
Craig
That's
Flower.
what I say to everyone.
Well, I suppose if you're talking about the building.
Yeah, the building.
if
The
you're talking
building.
about the physical building, it's obviously we think it's around 1840s.
Right.
So the building is 1858. I mean.
We're just talking about the
building. We'd have to look at when Craig Flower sort of started, but it was really catering to the families that were the Hudson Bay Company families that were over on that side, so,
Yeah.
View
Oh,
Royal,
see, yeah.
Esquimalt, the Chosen,
Yeah, it was one of the.
I'm going to try to look it up.
Okay.
I hate to throw another question
Sure.
in there, but I was just in Machosen on the weekend and they have a little
they
schoolhouse
do have a
there.
schoolhouse, yeah.
And I thought there was something there about it being a very
It was very
initial
early.
schoolhouse in Western Canada.
Yeah, it is very early, it
Yeah.
was started by a family.
Yeah, all the
I know the
families
land
like
was
it.
donated by a family and it's sort of to educate the kids that were way out in Machosen.
Yeah, the Whitties were involved
Whitties
and
were- yeah,
there was
that's
another
right.
name, I can't remember right now, but it was very familiar.
Yeah.
So I don't know what year that one was started, but the information was, it was
Yeah.
very early.
It is you're right, it is very early. Yeah, so there were these little, but remember, it would be impossible to get from Machosen to Victoria without a lot of jumping in a boat
Sure.
and getting on a horse, whatever you needed to do, right? So, yeah, these little schools did certainly pop up, around the whole island. Yeah, there was a little, by 1858, there was a little, school up in Duncan as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting history.
Mhm.
And it is the sort of larger context of education in this area. So anybody wants to explore that, I'll keep picking away anyway at that, so. I love your questions. This is great.
One more, and
Yeah.
that's that in all of these schools that were popping up, were girls and boys given equal access to schooling?
A lot of them were single sex. Like the Malandane School was for boys, the Petitbeau School was for girls, so it seemed to be the way it was at that
But
point.
did they,
Did they have co-ed schools?
oh,
Is that your
well,
question?
if the schools popped up and they were single sex,
Yeah.
were there pop-up schools
It was
for
for
both?
both, that's a good, you're challenging me. I like it. I'll have to look into that.